Croeso, welcome to this presentation for assignment TMA02 for module DD870 Global Development, which will consider how historical and scalar perspectives have helped me to understand global development issues. Within the presentation, I will focus on migration as a Block 2 issue and consider this within the context of world systems as a Block 2 theory and the potential for both qualitative and quantitative evidence to support discussion. Specifically, I would consider migration within a historical Welsh context. I consider explanations for and scale of emigration from Wales, for example, to South America, and how Wales was connected to and development within Wales was supported by forced migration inherent within the transatlantic slave trade, and how economic development in relation to copper mining in Swansea, for example, underpinned the use of slave labour in Cuba after the abolition of slavery and expansion of copper mining in Chile and Cuba led to the migration of skilled workers from South Wales. Welsh migration has left a mark on the world, and the legacy of Welsh involvement in slavery has left an indelible mark on the country still visible today. Migration suggests Hanlon and Vicino 2014 as a contentious and politically sensitive topic, and will conclude considering migration patterns in Wales today and potential future impacts of these. The PASH framework supports analysis of global development context, processes, and identifies and assesses the relative importance of key drivers and actors which shape a given global development situation. In particular, the framework supports questions relating to how and why something is happening, who may be involved and impacted, and the nature and extent of outcomes. The focus on power, agency, scale and history offers support to understand the nature and depth of change and development that has occurred, and both history and scale are supportive in understanding migration flows and the impact these have on the migrant and receiving and sending country. When considering the history and scale of migration, different types of evidence are important. Salmonanska 2022 suggests quantitative evidence is commonly used in migration studies to understand longitudinal patterns and refers to information that can be measured or counted. It is sometimes challenging in relation to gathering Welsh statistics, suggest Hatton and Williamson 1992 and Taylor 2018. As migrants were often subsumed by the England and Wales category, yet in other aspects data is more visible, such as the University College London Centre for the Study of the Legacies of British Slavery database, where Welsh or Wales domiciled individuals who were compensated for their losses as a result of the abolition of slavery are identifiable, or the transatlantic slave trade database where the nationality of slave ship captains such as Thomas Phillips of the slave ship Hannibal are recorded. Zapata, Barrero and Yalas 2022 suggest qualitative methods are important when researching migration, as they allow for exploration of how people, organisations and structures shape reality and offer an understanding of how people, organisations and structures both shape the environment and how the environment informs perceptions. Qualitative evidence may refer to artefacts such as newspaper articles, letters from migrant home, language and culture of a place, for example Welsh street names in Philadelphia, or ongoing cultural activities including Eisteddfodau in Patagonia, and is beneficial for identifying potential relationships and causes and effects of dynamic processes such as why an individual may have chosen to migrate. Migration suggests Straskandra 2005 potentially has had the most lasting and significant impacts on countries and transformed both migrants and societies to which they move and those which they leave behind, and is an often controversial issue today where news reports in the UK and the USA, for example, use terminology such as floods, surges or swarms of migration, and arguably help to fuel the rise of recent far-right political party support across many European countries. Migration suggests Feist 2016 is often motivated by relative disparities between sending and receiving countries, whilst it is important to remember that migration is a complex process with many migrants moving internally within their country as well as internationally, and recognise that some migration might be short-term, for example to study, whilst for others migration may be permanent, and while some migrants freely choose to move, for others this move may be forced as a result of natural disaster, conflict or discrimination. Feist 2000 suggests that migration theories may be placed within three categories at different levels: the micro level, considering migration decision-making from an individual's perspective; the meso level, considering migration decisions being influenced by family and social bond networks; whilst the macro level, which considers migration decisions at larger scale, for example relating to the economic structure of a country. Wickramasinghe and Vimalrantana 2017 note the long history of international migration research influenced by numerous disciplines, for example economics, sociology, geography and psychology, whilst Jennison 2007, like Massey et al. 1993, suggests international migration research is impacted by a lack of a common theoretical framework. De Haas 2021 suggests debates relating to migration remains based on simplistic models which may not explain patterns of migration and the processes that underpin them in the real world, as there are numerous economic, social, political and linkage factors that influence migration. Examples of theories that seek to explain migration include neoclassical theory and dual labour market theory, whilst world systems theory will be a focus later in the presentation. One of the most famous migrations from Wales relates to the settlement of the Chubut Valley in South America and the establishment of Oladfa, the colony. Despite this being a comparatively small migration, as noted by Williams 1976, of approximately 3,000 individuals, with the first migrants setting sail on board the Mimosa from Liverpool on the 28th of May 1865. For these migrants, this move may have been informed both by economic as well as ideological factors, with Taylor 2018 noting this movement as being particularly complex, with migrants taking the role of both coloniser and colonised, noting the paradox within the community in that the people who perceive their nation of having been stripped of its sovereignty, of being socially disparaged and culturally quashed, especially in relation to language and religion, choose migration and the creation of a new homeland through an act of colonisation. Bauer, 1954, noted the potential push of poverty and the pull of freedom and economic opportunity in addition to a nationalistic cultural agenda, which, although Wales-focused, was underpinned by debate from Welsh migrants already in the USA and Australia, evidencing dispersed global connections to achieve a utopian dream, which, as Hardy 2012 notes, relates to the German concept of Heimat, an idealised homeland or potential for national salvation. A further example of Welsh migration is evident in Chile, where Jones 2014 discusses labour migration of Welsh copper workers, supporting the transference of copper smelting technology and skills from the Swansea area, often referred to as Copperopolis, and the development of the world copper industry in the 19th century. And the legacy of this migration today can be seen in people's names, with approximately 30,000 Chileans having a Welsh surname. However, in the 1870s, approximately only 100 Welsh residents were living in Gayacan, which, despite being small in scale, equated to the largest single concentration of Welsh in Latin America outside of Oladfa. Jones 2014 notes this as a recognition of the global reach of the Swansea copper industry, including the need for new sources of raw materials and the transfer of both people and copper smelting skills as part of an ongoing migration of skilled labour from industrial Wales. For these Welsh migrants in Chile, their possession of skills afforded access to socially and economically privileged positions with greater wages than would be expected at home, although many were employed on fixed-term contracts with the expectation of returning to Wales, which suggests that, as in today, much migration might be time-limited. Underpinning this Welsh labour force in Gayacan was a dynamic set of migration networks, motives and recruitment processes. As noted by Guruk and Cassis 1992, networks often encourage the migration of others from the sending country, and the economic opportunities that were emerging in Gaiacan encouraged the migration of further Welsh merchants and tradesmen. The key factor which initially created and subsequently shaped migration of the copper smelters was their possession of industrial skills. As Parsons et al. 2020 note, migration of skilled workers is common, and this early example was no exception. The slave trade involved more than the buying and selling of people, with a complex process of manufacturing, shipping, investment and trading in place and supported by legislation without any of which the slave trade would have been unable to function. Statistically, Wales had relatively few slave owners, was underrepresented in compensation records, and despite an extensive coastline did not have ports such as Bristol or Liverpool, which were important centres for the slave trade. This did not mean, however, that the Welsh economy did not also benefit in the trade, and although no slave ship is documented as leaving any Welsh port, the slave industry was supported by and supported Welsh industry, for example, copper, iron and textiles, whilst slave trading vessels are documented as being built in places including Milford Haven and Pwllheli, Evans 2013. The first table on the slide shows evidence extrapolated from the Centre for the Study of the Legacies of British Slavery database, including numbers of individuals compensated for the freeing of slaves, indicating this comparatively low number in Wales, whilst the second table uses examples of 3 of the 100 Welsh individuals named, noting between them at the time of compensation they held between them 5,620 of the 15,655 slaves compensated for to Welsh individuals and received £127,100 in compensation. One example of Welsh links to the slave trade and migration relates to the production of Welsh plains, sometimes referred to as Negro cloth, most produced across mid-Wales. These textiles were directly involved in the barter for slaves and were seen as being the ideal material to enclothe slaves across the Caribbean. The industry, as noted by Hudson and Berg 2021, led to the significant proto-industrialisation of this area of Wales, where underemployed rural workers receiving outsourced work. Not only did this support the Welsh economy, but also drove internal migration of rural workers, for example, to the county of Meirionnydd. Heblich et al. 2022 note that wealth accumulated from slavery was invested, leading to a shift in employment from agriculture towards industry, seen, for example, in the source of finance of many of the entrepreneurs of the Cyfarthfa ironworks in South Wales. Whilst the Welsh copper industry both benefited from and supported the migration of enslaved labour even after the abolition of slavery. During the mid-19th century, a key source of copper ore for the smelters of the Swansea region was Cuba, and the royal copper mines of Cobre evidencing strong Welsh investment links, including the Grenfell, Galscott and Williams families, who invested their profits heavily in Swansea, Llanelli and Neath. Like the copper mines in Chile, the mines in Cuba required a skilled workforce, including Welsh miners, yet an 1836 survey of the mine noted a workforce consisting of 80 British specialists, 150 Cuban Spanish free workers and 422 slaves, which had grown to 479 slaves by 1841, making this operation, as noted by Evans 2014, the largest slave enterprise of the time in the Western Hemisphere and directly supported by the Swansea copper industry. Immigration from Wales in the 19th century was comparatively small in relation to England, Ireland and Scotland, for example. In the mid-19th century, with the population of Wales being approximately 1 million, there were an estimated 50,000 Welsh immigrants living in the USA, whilst by the end of the century, where the population of Wales had grown to approximately 2 million, approximately 100,000 Welsh-born people were living in the USA. In comparison to the 4 million people from Ireland who emigrated within the same period, this is low, yet there was much internal migration within Wales, for example from rural areas to the growing industrial areas and new towns, supporting the iron, steel and coal industries in South Wales, with the population of Swansea, for example, growing from approximately 6,500 in 1801 to over 100,000 by 1901. The 1970 Harris-Tadaro model assumes migration is motivated by the desire of the individual to maximise income based upon a rational comparison of the relative cost and benefit of remaining at home or moving, whilst initially created to explain internal migration flows, may also explain international migration. However, such a narrow focus on income maximisation and assumption of rational economic decision-making based on a potential migrant having access to full information may not represent the reality of many migration flows. Neoclassical theory notes Kurakova 2011 suggests international migration is largely influenced by wage differentials between areas, with migrants moving for paid or higher paid employment opportunities or improved working conditions, conceiving that a key motivation for migration is at a micro level the individual's desire to maximise their income. Dual labour market theory notes Lucis and Bowder 2010 suggests international migration is largely influenced by pull factors evident within the receiving country, or at least a perception of these, and links immigration to the structural requirements of modern industrial economies. World systems theory notes O'Reilly 2022 suggests immigration is a natural consequence of economic globalization, with Wallerstein 1983 noting a drive within capitalist countries to search for new natural resources, low-cost labour and new outlets for their production. It was within this context that capitalist countries started to colonize territories overseas. World systems theory suggests the influence of capitalistic economic relations into peripheral societies creates a mobile population which migrates internationally, for example from core to peripheral countries as businesses seek the new resources of raw materials or land or labour that industry requires, which may result in the exploitation of the periphery for the benefit of the core country. World systems theory therefore may offer an explanation as to the migration of Welsh copper workers to Chile and Cuba, or iron workers to Herzegovina in the Donbass region of Ukraine, and links to internal migration in Wales to work producing Welsh Plains textiles, and supported at least indirectly the Atlantic slave trade. Therefore does, as suggested by Cardulius and Hall 2007, support a comprehensive view of past and current migration. Simmons 2011, however, suggests the approach does not come without criticism, as he deems it incomplete, as it does not incorporate cultural and political forces that affect international migration. For example, whilst economic reasons for migration are key, migration such as the founding of the Welsh colony in Patagonia suggests that seeking political, religious and cultural freedoms linked to the sense of national identity should also not be ignored. Having considered the scale of historical emigration trends from Wales and how these were informed by economic, social and cultural factors on a micro, meso, micro and macro scale, and how in terms of comparative scale numbers these figures are lower than other areas of the UK, I would now consider demographic trends in Wales more recently, how migration has shaped recent population structures, noting how organisations such as the Bevan Foundation 2018 who suggest that internal and international migration flows will be the key to ensuring Wales's future population growth and underpin economic development. Recently, Wales, as in many countries, discussion of migration, in particular of refugees and asylum seekers, has been a divisive issue leading to conflicts. Evident on one side, Wales aiming to become the world's first nation of sanctuary, the Welsh Refugee Council 2024, and on the other, hostile opposition, for example, as reported by the BBC 2023 in relation to the since rescinded plan to convert Stradey Park Hotel in Llanelli to house asylum seekers. The Bevan Foundation 2018 note between 1997 and 2018 the population of Wales increased by 8% to 3,125,200 people, However, during this period, Wales recorded a greater number of deaths than births. For example, between 2016 and 2017, resulting in a natural change of -874, suggesting the majority of Wales's population growth resulted from internal and international migration. Recent Welsh migration trends evidence of an ageing society in general, and keenly felt in parts of the country without migration of young people, with Evans and Santa Cruz 2023 noting over 50% of Wales's local authorities lost more people between 18 and 29 years of age than they gained, with figures being especially pronounced in more rural and coastal societies, indicate a potential brain drain and impact on Welsh culture and language. Figures from the Bevan Foundation and 2021 National Census suggest that over the next 15 years, Wales's population is likely to decrease, and within that broad statement, patterns emerge, including an increased proportion of older age groups in the remaining population and significant decreases in the working age population. It is clear, therefore, that with natural population growth having a negligible impact on the Welsh population, that despite a contentious and divisive issue, any further population growth in Wales would rely on both internal and international in-migration and will ask profound questions relating to future housing needs, economic development, health and age of the population, educational provision, and sustainability of local communities and the Welsh language as Wales's population changes. Despite an abundance of anti-migration rhetoric, it is vital, as the Wales example shows, that migration is not perceived as what Castle's 2010 notes as something that needs to be fixed, rather is a normal aspect of social life and social change throughout history, even if the experience of most individuals has been to stay put rather than migrate. The modern or industrialised era is one characterised by high levels of migration and societal change, and migration being encouraged rather than being discouraged may be needed to support future societal and economic growth and development.